I did not argue when my mother smiled and told me to move out by Friday. I simply nodded at the papers my sister held like a verdict and opened the door for them. They had no clue I had legally secured the $1 million estate right after graduation. 2 days later, they returned with a moving truck only to realize that the house they thought they had stolen was actually a fortress I had already locked tight. My name is Piper Young, and I had been waiting for the sound of tires on gravel for exactly 22 days. From the window of the second-floor study, the view of Harbor Hollow was painted in shades of steel gray and pine green. The fog was rolling off the water, clinging to the ancient cedar trees that lined the driveway. This estate, with its wraparound porch and the smell of salt and old wood, was appraised at nearly $1 million. To the casual observer, it was a piece of prime real estate. To me, it was the only place in the world where the floorboards didn't feel like eggshells. I watched the black SUV pull up. It was my father's car. He parked crookedly, aggressively, the front bumper hanging over the edge of the flagstone path. It was a power move, subtle but intentional. He was marking territory. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold. I checked my watch. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was 28 years old. I had just graduated with a master's degree that nobody in that car cared about, and I was about to play the most difficult role of my life. I walked downstairs. I did not hurry. The house was silent around me. It was a heavy, comforting silence, the kind that only exists in houses built 80 years ago, where the walls are thick plaster and the doors are solid oak. I reached the bottom of the foyer stairs just as the front door swung open without a knock. They walked in as a formation. My mother, Elaine, led the charge. She was wearing a beige cashmere cardigan that looked soft, but probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, sprayed into a helmet of blonde defiance against the humidity outside. Behind her was Grant, my father, checking his phone as he stepped over the threshold, bringing a gust of damp, cold air with him, and between them, protected like a diamond in a velvet box, was Tessa. My younger sister looked radiant. Of course, she always did. She was wearing a trench coat belted tight at the waist, her eyes bright and predatory as they swept over the foyer. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the chandelier. She was looking at the wainscoting. She was assessing. "Piper," my mother said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of an obstruction. "Mom," I said. "Dad, Tessa." I stood near the staircase, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I made sure my posture was slumped just enough to suggest defeat, but not enough to look slouchy. I needed to look tired. I needed to look like I had given up. Elaine walked over to the console table and ran a finger along the surface, checking for dust, finding none. She frowned slightly, then turned her full, beaming attention to me. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "We need to talk, honey," Elaine said. Her voice was incredibly soft. It was the tone she used when she was firing a housekeeper or sending a meal back at a restaurant because the garnish was wrong. "Why don't we go into the living room?" They didn't wait for my answer. They walked past me into the main living space, the room with the massive stone fireplace and the view of the lake. Grant sat in grandfather's leather armchair. The leather groaned under his weight. My stomach tightened, a sharp, physical reject against seeing him in that chair. But I kept my face blank. Tessa didn't sit. She walked to the window, turned her back to the room, and looked out at the property. "So," Grant said, putting his phone away. He clasped his hands and leaned forward, adopting the pose of a benevolent patriarch, delivering hard wisdom. "We have been discussing the situation, the estate, the future." "The situation," I repeated flatly. "Yes," Elaine said. She remained standing, hovering near Grant. "We know you have been staying here since the funeral to help clear things out, and we appreciate that. Piper, truly, you have been very helpful." "But," Tessa said, turning around. She cut through the air with a single word. "It is time to move forward. Tessa reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She held it differently than one holds a magazine or a letter. She held it like a weapon. She tapped it against her palm. A rhythmic, dull thud. "We have gone through the probate details," Tessa said. Her voice was crisp, professional, the voice of someone who believes they are the smartest person in the room. "Mom and Dad have decided to transfer the deed. We expedited the filing. The house is going to be in my name." She said it so casually. The house is going to be in my name, as if she were ordering a latte. Grant nodded solemnly. "It makes the most sense. Piper, Tessa is getting married next year. She needs the space. You have your life, in the city. You are single. You don't need a 5-bedroom estate in Harbor Hollow. It is too much maintenance for one person. Plus," Elaine added, stepping forward and placing a hand on my arm. Her touch was cold. "We think it is best for you to have a fresh start, somewhere smaller, more manageable." I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at Tessa, who was watching me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "So," Tessa said, dropping the envelope onto the coffee table with a heavy slap, "we need you to vacate, soon." "How soon?" I asked. My voice was steady. Elaine squeezed my arm. "Friday. Sweetheart, we have contractors coming on Monday to start renovations. Tessa wants to redo the kitchen completely before the wedding planning starts in earnest." Friday. Today was Tuesday. They were giving me 72 hours to pack up 28 years of life, plus 60 years of my grandparents' history. "Friday," I said. "Yes," Grant said, his tone hardening just a fraction. "Friday, by 5 in the afternoon. We don't want to make this messy. Piper, we handled the papers. It is done. The house is Tessa's. We just want a smooth transition." Tessa stepped forward, closing the distance between us. She was shorter than me, but she always projected the energy of someone 6 feet tall. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming. "I have already scheduled the movers for Saturday morning to bring my things in," Tessa said. "So the space needs to be clear, totally clear. I don't want to deal with boxes of old junk." She called our grandparents' life old junk. The rage that flared in my chest was white hot. But I had practiced for this. I had spent the last 3 weeks practicing in front of the mirror, rehearsing my breathing, rehearsing the muscle control required to keep my face completely neutral. If I argued, they would dig in. If I screamed, they would call me unstable. If I cried, they would enjoy it. They expected a fight. They wanted a fight. They wanted to crush me, to prove that I was the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who didn't deserve the legacy of the young family. I looked at the envelope on the table. I didn't reach for it. I didn't open it. I knew exactly what was inside. I knew it contained a quitclaim deed prepared by their family attorney, waiting for signatures, or perhaps already signed by my parents as the executors, transferring ownership based on the assumption that the estate was theirs to give. I looked at Tessa. "You have the papers." "Signed and notarized." Tessa lied. Or maybe she thought it was the truth. It didn't matter. "It is over, Piper." I took a slow breath. I let my shoulders drop another inch. I looked at the floor, then back up at them. "Okay," I said. The word hung in the air. Elaine blinked. "Okay. Okay," I repeated. "I understand. You are right. It is a big house. I can't maintain it alone." The tension in the room snapped. It was almost comical. Grant sat back in the chair, looking disappointed that he didn't get to use his booming father voice. Elaine looked confused. Her script useless now that I wasn't playing the villain. Tessa just looked suspicious. "You are not going to make a scene?" Tessa asked, narrowing her eyes. "Why would I?" I walked over to the mantel and picked up a small ceramic bird, one my grandmother had painted. I turned it over in my hands. "If the papers are signed, the papers are signed. I have to be realistic, right?" "Exactly," Grant said, exhaling loudly. "I am glad you are finally being mature about this. Piper, finally. I will start packing today," I said. placing the bird back down gently. I can be out by Friday. No problem. Elaine clapped her hands together once, a sharp sound of delight. Oh, wonderful. I knew you would understand. We can help you find a nice apartment in the city, maybe something studio-sized. I will handle my own living arrangements, I said. But thank you. Tessa walked over to the fireplace. She ran her hand along the stone. I am going to paint this white, she murmured. This natural stone is so dated, and the floors needs to be sanded down. They are too dark. I felt a spasm of pain in my chest. Grandfather had laid these stones himself, but I forced a small, tight smile. It will look very modern, I said. It will look expensive, Tessa corrected. She turned to me. I need the keys, now. I need to give a set to the contractor. I have a spare set in the kitchen, I said. I will get them for you. I walked into the kitchen, away from their eyes. I gripped the granite counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I counted to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I took the spare key from the hook, the key to the back door. The one that stuck if you didn't jiggle it just right, and walked back out. I handed it to Tessa. Here, I said. She snatched it from my palm without saying thank you. Great. I will be back on Friday at 5 to do the final walkthrough. If there is anything left here, the movers are instructed to trash it. Understood, I said. Come on, Grant said, standing up. We have a lunch reservation at the club. Piper, you have a lot of work to do. I do, I said. I followed them to the door. I held it open for them. I watched my mother button her coat. I watched my father check his watch. I watched Tessa tuck the folder under her arm, walking out with the swagger of a queen who has just conquered a new kingdom. See you Friday, Tessa threw over her shoulder. Drive safe, I said. I stood in the doorway and watched them get into the black SUV. I watched them back out, crushing the hydrangeas my grandmother had planted along the border of the driveway. I watched the car disappear down the winding road, swallowed by the morning fog. They were celebrating. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were going to drive to the country club, order champagne, and toast to their cleverness. They would laugh about how easy it was. They would say I was weak. They would say I was finally broken. They didn't ask the right questions. They didn't ask why I wasn't at my graduation party 3 weeks ago. They didn't ask where I was the Tuesday following the ceremony. They didn't ask why the mail had stopped coming to the house 10 days ago. If they had looked closely at the papers Tessa was holding, they might have noticed that the deed they were relying on was based on a will that had been superseded. But they didn't look. They never looked. They just assumed that because they were loud, and because they were aggressive, they were right. I closed the heavy oak door. I didn't lock it. Not yet. I leaned my back against the wood and slid down until I was sitting on the foyer floor. The house was quiet again, but the silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was vibrating. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady now. I opened a messaging app that was encrypted. I scrolled to a contact I had saved simply as verify. I typed a single message. They have started. Please arrive on schedule. I watched the delivered checkmark appear, then the read checkmark. I stood up and brushed the dust off my jeans. I walked over to the front door and placed my hand on the brass knob. It was cold and solid metal, worn smooth by 60 years of my grandfather's hand, and then my hand. My family thought this door was the only thing separating them from ownership. They thought that by Friday, they would have the right to change the locks. They didn't realize that the lock wasn't the barrier. I looked at the brass mechanism and felt a cold, sharp satisfaction settle in my gut. They were coming back in 48 hours with trucks and contractors and dreams of white-painted stone. They were coming back to claim a prize. They had no idea that I had already turned the entire house into a vault, and I was the only one who knew the combination. The silence that followed my family's departure was not empty. In this house, silence had texture. It had weight. I walked from the foyer into the kitchen, the room that had always been the beating heart of the estate. The air here still smelled faintly of cinnamon and lemon oil, a scent that had permeated the drywall over 4 decades. Outside the bay window, the waters of Harbor Hollow lapped against the retaining wall. It was a rhythmic, sloshing sound, like a giant animal breathing in its sleep. I closed my eyes and listened. This was the sound that had put me to sleep every summer since I was 4 years old. To my parents, this noise was just dampness that rotted the siding. To Tessa, it was a backdrop for a selfie. To me, it was the only lullaby I had ever known. I made myself a cup of tea, using the chipped blue mug that my grandfather, Walter, used to drink his coffee from. As the steam rose, hitting my face, the adrenaline from the confrontation in the hallway began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching nostalgia. Growing up, love in the young family was a finite resource. It was a pie that was too small for 4 people, and somehow, Tessa always got the first slice, the biggest slice, and the last crumb. I did not hate her for it back then. It is hard to hate the sun for shining, even if it burns you. I just learned to stand in the shade. I was the independent one. That was the label Elaine and Grant slapped on me before I could even tie my own shoes. "Piper is fine," my mother would say at dinner parties, waving a hand dismissively while Tessa performed a tap dance or recited a poem in the center of the living room. "Piper is self-sufficient. She doesn't need fussing over." It sounded like a compliment, but even at 7 years old, I knew it was a dismissal. It meant, do not ask us for help, do not have needs, do not be inconvenient. Independence is just a fancy word for neglect that has been rebranded as a virtue. But here, in this house at Harbor Hollow, the rules were different. My grandmother, June, did not care about independence. She cared about whether you had eaten. She cared about whether you were warm. I remember running away here when I was 16. I had gotten a B on a chemistry test, and the disappointment at home had been so thick, so suffocating, that I felt like I couldn't breathe. I drove my beat-up sedan 2 hours to the coast. Arriving at midnight, Grandfather Walter had opened the door. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't ask about school. He just looked at my tear-streaked face, stepped aside, and said, "The kettle is on." That night, we sat on the back porch, listening to the wind chimes. Those chimes were made of heavy copper tubes that Walter had cut himself. They didn't tinkle. They resonated. They sang in low, mournful tones that vibrated right through your chest. You are trying too hard to be what they want. Walter had told me that night, his voice rough like tree bark. You can't carve a statue out of water. Piper, stop trying to hold their shape. I stayed for the weekend. We didn't talk about grades. We gardened. We walked the perimeter of the property. I helped him fix the loose railing on the dock. For 48 hours. I wasn't the disappointment or the independent one. I was just Piper. I was just a girl who was loved simply because she existed. That was the magic of this house. It was the only place where I didn't have to earn my space. But houses, like people, get old. And people, unlike houses, cannot be renovated indefinitely. The decline started 5 years ago. It began with small things. June forgetting to turn off the stove. Walter losing his balance on the stairs. The phone calls to my parents became frequent, but the visits did not. "We are just so swamped with the business," Grant would say on the phone, his voice tight with fake regret. "Can you drive down there this weekend? Piper, check on them. You are so good with them." So I went. I went every weekend, then every 3 days. Then, during the last 2 years of my master's degree, I moved my entire life into the guest room downstairs so I could be there every night. I became the keeper of the decline. I was the one who learned the difference between a confused wander and a dangerous exit-seeking behavior. I was the one who labeled the cupboards so June wouldn't put the milk in the pantry. I was the one who sat with Walter when his lungs rattled like dry leaves, holding his hand until the morphine kicked in. I managed the money, too. That was the part my parents never asked about, because asking would have required them to get involved. Walter had handed me the checkbook 3 years ago. His hands were shaking so bad he couldn't sign his name on the utility bill. "You do it, Pip," he had whispered. "You have got a good head, better than mine." I took over everything. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance premiums. I hired the landscapers to keep the yard from turning into a jungle. Even though June could no longer walk out to see it, I balanced every single ledger. I knew exactly how much money was in the retirement accounts, and I knew exactly how fast the medical bills were draining it. And where were Elaine, Grant, and Tessa? They came for Thanksgiving. They came for Christmas if they didn't have a better offer in the Caribbean. I remember one specific visit. 6 months before June passed, Tessa had driven down in her new convertible. She walked into the house, wrinkling her nose at the smell of antiseptic and old age that I couldn't quite scrub out of the carpets. "God, it is depressing in here," Tessa had said, dropping her bag on the table I had just wiped down. She looked at me, wearing oversized sweatpants and no makeup, dark circles under my eyes from 3 nights of no sleep. "You look terrible. Piper, you really need to take better care of yourself. It is not healthy to bury yourself alive here." Elaine had walked around the living room, touching the antiques. She wasn't looking at them with affection. She was looking at them like an auctioneer. "That grandfather clock is an original, isn't it?" Elaine had asked, tapping the glass. "I wonder what that would fetch in the city." "Mom, Grandma is sleeping in the next room," I had hissed, angry tears stinging my eyes. "I am just being practical," she had sniffed. "June won't need a clock forever. We have to think about the estate." The estate. That was all they saw. They didn't see the home. They saw a portfolio asset. They saw a line item on a spreadsheet. When June died, they cried beautifully at the funeral. Tessa gave a eulogy about baking cookies with Nana that was entirely fictional, considering she hadn't baked a cookie with June in 15 years. But the crowd ate it up. They patted Grant on the back. They told Elaine she was so strong. I stood in the back, dry-eyed, because I had done my grieving while changing bedsheets and spoon-feeding broth. After June was gone, Walter faded fast. It is a cliché, but it is true. He didn't want to be here without her, but in those final months, his mind, which had been foggy for a year, suddenly cleared. It was a phenomenon the doctors called terminal lucidity. 2 weeks before he died, which was just 5 weeks ago, Walter called me to his bedside. The room was dark, lit only by the street lamp outside casting long shadows across the quilt. "Piper," he rasped. "I am here." "Grandpa," I said, putting down the book I was reading. He gripped my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, a ghost of the carpenter he used to be. "They are coming," he said. I thought he meant the doctors, or maybe angels, if you believe in that sort of thing. "Who is coming?" "The vultures," he said. He looked me dead in the eye, his blue eyes sharp and terrifyingly aware. "Your parents, Tessa. They are waiting for the clock to stop so they can strip the gears." A chill went down my spine. I hadn't told him about the comments Elaine made about the clock. I hadn't told him about Grant asking to see the bank statements just for safekeeping. "They think I am asleep," Walter whispered. "They talk over me. They talk about selling the lot. They talk about subdividing the land. They think because I am old, I am deaf. I won't let them hurt the house," I promised. He shook his head violently. "No, do not fight them with sentiment. You can't fight greedy people with feelings. Piper, they don't speak that language. You have to fight them with paper." He pulled me closer. I signed the papers, the new ones. "The lawyer, the one who isn't your father's golf buddy. You remember?" I nodded. "Miles, the estate attorney Walter had insisted on seeing privately 6 months ago. I had driven him there, thinking it was just routine maintenance." "Everything is arranged," Walter said, his voice dropping to a wheeze. "But you have to trigger it. It is a dormant mechanism. You have to be the one to turn the key. I left it all to the trust, and I made you the trustee. But they don't know. They think the old will from 10 years ago is the only one." I sat frozen. The old will from 10 years ago left everything to Grant and Elaine, with the assumption they would care for us. "Why didn't you tell them?" I asked. "Because they would have put me in a home," he said simply. "They would have declared me incompetent and taken power of attorney. I had to play the fool to keep my freedom." He coughed. "A terrible, wet sound that rattled his whole frame. When he settled back, he looked exhausted, the light fading from his eyes. "Listen to me, Piper," he whispered. "When I go, they will descend. They will try to bully you. They will try to make you feel small. They will use your own politeness against you." "I know," I said. "Don't wait," he said. "Don't wait for them to ask permission. If you wait for permission, you have already lost." That was the last coherent conversation we ever had. He slipped into a coma the next day and passed away 3 days later. Standing in the kitchen now, holding the cold mug of tea, I felt the truth of his words settle in my gut like a stone. He was right. The last 3 weeks since the funeral had been a masterclass in gaslighting. Elaine asking for the keys just to water the plants when I was already living there watering them. Grant asking for the social security numbers for the death certificate when the funeral home had already handled it. Tessa measuring the windows for curtains. They weren't grieving, they were appraising. They looked at this house and saw $1 million. They saw a renovation project. They saw a summer home to show off to their friends. I looked at the walls, at the pencil marks on the door frame that measured my height from age 3 to age 18. I looked at the scratches on the floor where Walter's dog used to pace. I looked at the spot by the window where June sat for hours watching the birds. This wasn't an asset. This was a vessel of memory, and they were going to gut it. I rinsed the mug and placed it in the drying rack. My reflection in the dark window looked back at me. I didn't look like the independent Piper anymore. I looked like Walter's granddaughter. I thought about the timeline. I had followed Walter's instructions perfectly. I had met with Miles immediately after the graduation ceremony, a ceremony my parents attended for 45 minutes before leaving for a dinner reservation I wasn't invited to. While they were eating steak, I was signing the trust documents that activated the transfer of the deed upon Walter's death. But I hadn't filed the public notice immediately. Miles had advised me to wait until the contest period window was tricky, or rather, to let them make the first move so their intent to bypass the true will was documented. Now, they had made their move. They had forged ahead with the old will, ignored the possibility of a new one, and tried to physically displace me. I walked to the living room and picked up the envelope Tessa had left. I didn't need to open it to know it was a threat wrapped in legalese. I remembered Walter's voice. Don't wait for them to ask permission. I wasn't waiting anymore. I walked to the front door, the same door I had closed on them an hour ago. I locked the deadbolt, then I engaged the second lock, the heavy brass slide bolt that Walter had installed 40 years ago after a string of break-ins in the county. It made a solid, final thunk sound, but that wasn't enough. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the small toolbox. I walked back to the front door. With steady hands, I began to dismantle the entire handle mechanism. If they wanted to get back in on Friday with their keys, they were going to be very disappointed, because by the time the sun went down tonight, there wouldn't be a keyhole left to insert a key into. I was going to replace every entry lock on the house with biometric smart locks that I had bought 2 weeks ago and hidden in the garage. Locks that only responded to my fingerprint and a code that existed only in my head. Let them come with their movers. Let them come with their papers. I took the first screw out of the faceplate. Everything is arranged, Walter had said. You just need to be awake. I was wide awake now, and I was about to give the young family a very rude awakening. I stood in the foyer, the screwdriver still heavy in my hand, listening to the silence of the house. The new biometric lock on the front door hummed softly, a green light pulsing once before fading into the matte black finish. It was done. The physical perimeter was secure, but as I stared at the door, my mind drifted back to the conversations that had led me to this extreme measure. The ambush today hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been foreshadowed in 100 small, slippery comments over the last 3 weeks. They were like hairline fractures in a dam, invisible at first, but if you ran your fingers over them, you could feel the pressure building behind the concrete. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the island. I opened my laptop. While I waited for the system to boot up, I let myself replay the tea summit from 10 days ago. It had been a Sunday. The funeral flowers were just starting to wilt on the sideboard. dropping dead petals onto the mahogany surface. Elaine and Grant had come over under the pretense of checking on me. They brought pastries from a bakery in the city, the kind that cost $8 apiece and tasted like cardboard. "We are just worried about you, Piper," Elaine had said, pouring tea into grandfather's delicate china. She didn't ask if I wanted tea, she just poured it. "This house, it is a monster to maintain. Have you seen the heating bill for last January? I found it in the study." She had been snooping. Of course she had. "It is high," I had replied, keeping my voice neutral. "But the insulation in the attic helps." "Does it?" Grant chimed in. He was leaning against the counter, eating a croissant without a plate, letting flakes fall onto the floor I had just swept. "We were looking at the property tax assessment. It went up again this year, $12,000. Piper, that is not pocket change for a girl your age." "I have savings," I said. "Savings burn fast," Grant said, shaking his head with a grimace that was supposed to look like paternal concern but looked more like a bank manager denying a loan. "And then there is the inheritance tax implications. If we don't handle the transfer correctly, the government is going to take 40%. Do you want that?" "I don't think it is 40% for direct descendants," I said softly. "You are not a tax attorney, honey," Elaine said, cutting me off with a smile that was all teeth. "Grant has been talking to his people. They say the best way to protect the asset is to consolidate it. Put it in a trust where we are all listed. But Dad and I manage the overhead. For safety." Safety? That was their favorite word. They used it to disguise control. "And what about Tessa?" I had asked. Elaine sighed, the sound of a martyr. "Tessa is fragile right now. She needs stability. She has been looking at condos in the city, but the market is impossible. We were thinking, just hypothetically, that if we all owned this place, Tessa could use it as a base. It is only fair. Grandpa and Grandma would have wanted everything split equally. Don't you think?" Fair. That word triggered a memory so sharp I almost dropped my tea. I remembered Aunt Sarah, 7 years ago. Grant's sister, Sarah, had lent my father $50,000 to cover a short-term liquidity issue in his business when she needed it back for her daughter's tuition. Grant and Elaine had invited her to dinner. They didn't bring a check. They brought a narrative. They told the rest of the family that Sarah was being predatory, that she was trying to bankrupt her own brother during a hard time. They spun the story until Sarah wasn't the lender anymore. She was the villain. She never got the money back. She just got a reputation for being greedy. I looked at my parents in that kitchen 10 days ago, and I saw the same script being written for me. If I fought them on fairness, I would become the greedy granddaughter hoarding the family estate. So, I had decided to play the role they expected. The role of the overwhelmed, soft-spoken girl who was good at following orders but bad at math. "I suppose you are right," I had said, lowering my eyes. "It is a lot of money. I don't know if I can handle the taxes alone." I saw the tension leave Grant's shoulders. I saw Elaine exchange a quick, victorious glance with him. They thought they had me. They thought I was folding. "Exactly," Grant said, his voice rich with relief. "We just want to help you. Piper, we will get the paperwork drawn up. You won't have to worry about a thing." That was 10 days ago. Then came Tessa's visit. 4 days later. She hadn't brought pastries. She had brought a tape measure, though she tried to hide it in her purse. She claimed she was looking for a specific photo album of her childhood to scan for a project. I let her in. I watched her. She didn't look for albums. She walked through the rooms with the cold, calculating gaze of a flipper. She opened the pantry and checked for dry rot. She flushed the toilets to check the pressure. She stood in the center of the living room and spun around slowly, not taking in the memories, but calculating square footage. "This wall," she had said, tapping the partition between the kitchen and the dining room. "It is load-bearing, isn't it?" "I think so," I said. "Grandpa built it to support the upper deck." "Pity," Tessa muttered. "It really closes off the flow. An open concept would add at least $50,000 to the value." She caught herself and looked at me, flashing a bright, fake smile. "I mean, if we ever decided to sell, which we won't, obviously. But it is good to know the equity, right? Right, I said, later that afternoon, while she was pretending to look through a bookshelf in the hallway. I saw her pull out her phone. She angled it to take a picture of a document I had left intentionally on the side table. It was a fake utility bill I had mocked up, showing an overdue balance of $3,000. I wanted them to think I was drowning. I wanted them to think the ship was sinking so they would rush to rescue it and, in their haste, make mistakes. Tessa snapped the photo and slipped the phone back into her pocket. "You know, Piper," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "if you are struggling, you can tell us. Mom says you haven't been working much since graduation." "I am managing," I lied. "Sure," she said, "but why struggle? We are family. If you just sign the house over to Mom and Dad, you could walk away with a nice little payout, maybe $20,000. You could travel, go to Europe, find yourself $20,000 for $1 million estate." The insult was so massive it was almost impressive. "I will think about it," I said. But the real twist, the moment I knew for certain that war was inevitable, came from a source they didn't account for. Mr. Henderson, the neighbor 2 houses down. He was a retired naval officer who spent his days watching the neighborhood through his binoculars. He caught me at the mailbox the day after Tessa's visit. "Your sister is a spirited one," Mr. Henderson had grunted, leaning over his fence. "She has a lot of energy," I agreed. "She stopped by my place yesterday," he said. "Asked me about the property lines, wanted to know if I would have an objection to a construction crew blocking the shared easement road for a few weeks next month." My blood ran cold. "Next month?" "Yeah," Henderson said. "Said she is planning a full gut renovation, kitchen, bathrooms, new roof, said she has the permits lined up. She had told the neighbors she was renovating before she even owned the house. She was so confident, so arrogant in her assumption that I would just roll over, that she was already scheduling contractors. That was the moment the sadness in me died, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Back in the present, I shook my head to clear the memories. I looked at my laptop screen. The operating system was loaded. I logged into the secure email server I had set up with Miles, my attorney. There was a new notification. It had come in 20 minutes ago, while I was installing the biometric lock. The subject line read, "New filing alert, County Clerk, property ID 00492. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked it open. It wasn't a filing from me, and it wasn't a filing from Miles. It was an automated alert from the service I had subscribed to, the one that monitored any legal activity regarding the address. Document type quitclaim deed, grantor Elaine Young, executor, grantee Tessa Young, status pending review. I stared at the screen. They had done it. They had actually forged ahead. They had filed a deed transferring the property from the estate to Tessa, bypassing me entirely, based on the assumption that the old will was the valid one and that I wouldn't notice until it was too late. They thought the filing would slip through the bureaucratic cracks. They thought by the time I realized what happened, the title would be in Tessa's name, and I would be the one having to sue to get it back, a process that takes years and costs thousands. They moved fast, faster than I expected. But then I saw the timestamp on the digital receipt attached to the filing. They had submitted it electronically yesterday afternoon. I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a chess player who watches their opponent move their queen into a trap they spent 10 turns setting up. They had filed a quitclaim deed on a property that was no longer part of the estate they controlled. I opened a second window and pulled up the confirmation for my own filing, the one Miles and I had executed quietly, legally, and permanently, 3 days after graduation, the one that transferred the title not to a person, but to the Walter and June Young Irrevocable Trust. Their filing was trying to grab smoke. They were trying to transfer a house that the estate of Walter Young no longer owned, but the fact that they submitted a legal document claiming ownership they didn't verify, that was the mistake. That was the overreach. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't a text this time. It was an email from the county clerk's automated system, a follow-up to the alert, Alert conflict detected. Title clouded. Please contact clerk office immediately. I sat back in the chair. The kitchen was silent. But inside the digital world, alarm bells were starting to ring. They had just walked into the minefield. I picked up my phone and dialed Miles. "They filed," I said when he answered. "I see it," Miles said. His voice was calm, professional. "They just committed fraud. Piper, maybe not intentionally if they claim ignorance, but on paper. They just tried to sell something they don't own. This is it. This is the leverage." "What do I do?" "Nothing," Miles said. "Let them come on Friday. Let them bring the movers. Let them think the filing went through. When they find out it was rejected, I want them to be standing on your porch with an audience." I hung up. I looked at the pending review status on their filing one last time. Bitter. That was the only word for it. They thought they were serving me a defeat sweet as tea, but they had just swallowed a poison pill. I closed the laptop. The sun was starting to set over Harbor Hollow, casting long shadows across the floorboards. I had 2 days left to prepare the final stage. They asked about taxes. They asked about renovations. They asked about fairness. They should have asked who held the keys. To understand why I was standing in a fortified house waiting for a siege, you have to understand where I was 3 weeks ago. You have to understand the quiet, dusty room where the real war was won before a single shot was fired. It was the Tuesday after the funeral. I had driven into the city, leaving the gray mist of Harbor Hollow for the gridlock of downtown. I wasn't going to a glass and steel skyscraper where men in $3,000 suits made deals in seconds. I was going to a brownstone on 4th Street, to an office that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Miles Klein had been my grandfather's attorney for 40 years. He was a man who moved with the slow, deliberate gravity of a tortoise. He didn't speak until he had considered a sentence from 3 different angles. I sat in a leather chair that swallowed me whole. The office was lined with books that looked like they hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. It was the complete opposite of the world my sister Tessa lived, in a world of Instagram filters and instant gratification. This room was built on things that lasted. "They are already measuring the rooms. Miles," I said. I didn't have to explain who they were. Miles took off his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief. He looked tired. "It is fast," he said. "Even for the young family, that is fast." "Mom asked me where the deed was kept," I continued. "Dad asked if the insurance policy was up to date. They aren't grieving. They are liquidating." Miles put his glasses back on. He looked at me across the expanse of his mahogany desk. "And what did you tell them?" "I played dumb," I said. "I told them I was just the caretaker, that I didn't know anything about the paperwork." "Good," Miles nodded. "Ignorance is your best armor right now." He opened a thick file folder in front of him. I saw my grandfather's shaky signature on the top document. It was a letter of intent, written 6 months ago, the day Walter had decided he couldn't trust his own children. "Here is the reality. Piper," Miles said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming heavy and serious. "The law is a tool, but it is a slow tool. Possession, intimidation, and momentum, those are fast tools. Your parents and your sister operate on momentum. They believe that if they move fast enough, if they are loud enough, if they simply occupy the space, the law will eventually catch up and rubber stamp their victory." He leaned forward. "They will act first. They will move in. They will change the locks. And then they will dare you to spend 5 years and $50,000 in court to get them out. And they know you don't have that kind of money. They are banking on your exhaustion." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. He was describing exactly what was happening. The move out by Friday command wasn't a request. It was a bulldozer. "So how do I stop a bulldozer?" I asked. "You don't stand in front of it," Miles said. "You dig a trench so deep it falls in." He pushed a stack of papers toward me. These weren't the standard probate forms. The paper felt heavier, thicker. The header was printed in bold, uncompromising font. The Walter and June Young Irrevocable Trust. "We talked about this with Walter," Miles said. But we never executed the final transfer of the deed because he was afraid your mother would see the public filing while he was still alive and cause a scene at the hospital. He wanted peace in his final days. I know, I whispered. But now? Miles tapped the paper. We execute it. This document does 3 things. First, it removes the Harbor Hollow estate from the probate process entirely. It is no longer an asset of the estate of Walter Young. It is an asset of the trust. That means your parents, as executors of the will, have no authority over it. None. I traced the letters with my finger. Irrevocable. It sounded permanent. It sounded like a stone dropping into a well. Second, Miles continued, it names you as the sole trustee with the right of residency for life. You are not just the owner. You are the steward. You decide who enters. You decide who stays. And the third thing is the safety net, Miles said. He turned the page to a section full of complex clauses. I have drafted this so that any modification to the trust requires the approval of an independent trust protector. That is me. Even if they bully you, even if they guilt-trip you, even if they sit you down at a table and scream at you until you cry and agree to sign the house over to Tessa, you can't. Your signature alone isn't enough to break this trust. I would have to agree, and I will never agree. I looked up at him. He was offering me handcuffs. But they weren't handcuffs to bind me. They were handcuffs to strap me to the mast of the ship so the storm couldn't wash me away. They will hate me, I said. It wasn't a question. They already resent you. Piper, Miles said gently, because you were there, because you did the work they didn't want to do. This will just make it official. He handed me a pen. It was a heavy black fountain pen. If you sign this, he said, there is no going back. The house belongs to the trust. You can't sell it next year to buy a sports car. You can't mortgage it to go on vacation. It is preserved. It is a fortress. I thought about the sound of the wind chimes. I thought about the way the light hit the floorboards in the morning. I thought about Tessa talking about painting the stone fireplace white. I took the pen. The nib scratched against the paper. A loud, decisive sound in the quiet room. I signed my name. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the notary, a quiet woman named Brenda, who had been sitting in the corner, came over and stamped it with a thud that felt like a gavel striking a sounding block. Thud. It was done. Now, Miles said, closing the folder. We wait. We wait. We have to file this with the county, he explained. But these things take time to process in the system. While it is processing, your family is going to try things. They're going to try to file their own papers. They might even hire one of those online deed filing services. Tessa mentioned something like that, I said. She said she has people handling the paperwork. Miles scowled. Predators. There are companies that prey on new heirs. They file quitclaim deeds without doing a proper title search. They take the fee and leave you with a legal mess. If your sister uses one of them, she is going to create a cloud on the title. But because we signed this today, and because the trust is dated effective as of Walter's death per his instructions, our claim is superior, but it will get messy. So what do I do until the dust settles? You act normal, Miles commanded. You go back to the house, you drink their tea, you listen to their insults, and you document everything. He handed me a business card. On the back, he had written a list of instructions. 1. Do not argue. 2. Do not reveal the trust exists. 3. Record dates and times of every entry. 4. Save every text message. Why can't I just tell them? I asked. Why can't I just wave this paper in their faces and make them leave? Because if you tell them now, Miles said, they will try to destroy the credibility of the trust before it is fully recorded. They will claim Walter was incompetent when he drafted it. They will claim you manipulated him. They will drag this into court immediately. He leaned back. But if you let them think they have won, if you let them walk up to that door believing they own the place, and then we drop the wall on them, their shock will be our advantage. They will overplay their hand, and when they do, we will have them on record trespassing. So I went back to Harbor Hollow. For 3 weeks, I lived a double life. In the mornings, I was the dutiful, submissive daughter. I nodded when Grant lectured me about financial responsibility. I stepped aside when Tessa walked through the hallway as if she were on a runway. I said, "Okay," when Elaine told me to pack my things. But at night, I was an archivist of their greed. I created a folder on my encrypted drive. I named it The Evidence. I took screenshots of the text messages Tessa sent me. Tessa, Tuesday, 10:14 a.m. a.m. Don't forget to clean out the garage. I need space for the Porsche. Elaine, Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Make sure you leave the antique silver. That is family property, not yours. Grant, Friday, 2:00 p.m. I canceled the landscaping contract. I will hire my own guys once we take possession. Every text was a brick in the wall I was building against them. They were documenting their own intent to seize the property without waiting for probate to close. I installed the audio recorders in the living room, legal in my state, as long as one party, me, consented to the recording. I captured the conversation where Grant admitted he needed to leverage the house to cover a business loan. I captured Tessa laughing about how she was going to evict the hermit. It was exhausting. It felt like living with a knife pressed against my throat, waiting for permission to breathe. But the hardest part wasn't the fear. It was the heartbreak. Listening to them, really listening to them, stripped away the last layer of childhood denial I had been clinging to. I realized they didn't just want the house. They wanted to erase me from it. To them, I wasn't a family member. I was a squatter. I was an obstacle to be removed so the real life, their life, could begin. Yesterday, after the confrontation in the hallway where they told me to be out by Friday, I called Miles again. They set a deadline, I told him. Friday at 5. They are coming with movers. Friday, Miles repeated. I could hear him checking his calendar. Excellent. Excellent. It is the perfect stage, Miles said. They are escalating to a physical takeover. That means we can meet them with a physical defense. I am scared, Miles, I admitted. I was standing in the kitchen, looking at the biometric locks I hadn't installed yet. What if they just break the door down? What if they bring the police? Let them bring the police, Miles said, his voice calm and steely. In fact, I hope they do. The police enforce the law, and the law is on your side. He paused, and I heard the scratch of his pen. I am not coming alone on Friday. Piper, Miles said. I am bringing someone with me. Another lawyer. No, Miles said. A witness, an official from the county process server's office, someone whose job is to verify the delivery of legal documents and the status of occupancy, a neutral third party. When your father starts screaming and your sister starts crying, this person won't care. They will just write it down. A witness, I repeated. Exactly, Miles said. We are going to let them walk right up to the trap. We are going to let them think the door is opening for them. And then, we are going to show them exactly who holds the keys. I hung up the phone. The memory of that meeting in the dusty office anchored me. I looked at the text message history on my phone. Tessa, movers are booked. Hope you are packed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had signed the paper. I had engaged the trust. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to step on the trigger. The strangest thing about a shark attack is not the bite. It is the water going still right before the strike. In the 48 hours leading up to the Friday deadline, my family stopped barking orders. They stopped sending aggressive emails about wasted potential and financial burdens. Instead, they pivoted to a strategy that was infinitely more terrifying. They started being nice. It began on Wednesday evening, just a day after I had closed the door on their eviction notice. I was in the kitchen, labeling a box of grandfather's journals not to pack them away, but to organize them for the library I planned to build when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the sharp, demanding ring I was used to. It was a cheerful, rhythmic pattern. Ding-dong-ding. I checked the new camera feed on my phone before I moved. Standing on the porch were Elaine and Tessa. They weren't holding legal papers this time. They were holding a casserole dish and a bottle of wine. I opened the door, leaving the security chain engaged for a fraction of a second too long. just to let them feel the resistance. Then I slid it back and smiled. My smile was a mirror of theirs, thin, polite, and completely empty. "Surprise?" Elaine chirped. She was wearing an apron over her designer blouse, a costume of domesticity she hadn't worn since I was 6. "We thought you might be too busy packing to cook, so we brought dinner, lasagna. Grandma's recipe?" It wasn't Grandma's recipe. Grandma June used a specific blend of sausage and fennel. I could smell the distinct sterile aroma of a store-bought gourmet meal wafting from the dish, but I stepped back. "That is so thoughtful," I said. "We are family." "Piper?" Tessa said, breezing past me. She placed the wine on the entry table. "We just want to spend some quality time together before the transition." The transition? That was their new word for kicking me out. It sounded like a corporate merger, or a gender reveal party, or a death. We sat in the dining room. The air was thick with a performance so elaborate it deserved a stage. Elaine served the lasagna with a flourish, talking about how much she missed the old days when we would all gather here for 4th of July. She conveniently forgot that for the last 10 years, she had spent every 4th of July in the Hamptons because the humidity at Harbor Hollow frizzing her hair. "Do you remember when Dad taught you to ride a bike on the driveway?" Tessa asked, taking a sip of wine. Her eyes were locked on my face, scanning for a crack in my armor. "I do," I said. "I fell into the hydrangeas." "Exactly." Elaine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Such good memories. That is why we want to keep this house in the family. Piper, to protect those memories. We were worried that if you were here all alone, you might get overwhelmed. You might sell it to strangers." "I would never sell," I said softly, staring at my fork. "Of course not," Grant said. He had arrived 10 minutes late, claiming traffic, but I suspected he had been on a call with his bank. He cut into his lasagna with surgical precision. "But life happens. Taxes happen. We just want to take the burden off your shoulders. You understand that, right? This isn't about taking something from you. It is about doing something for you." I chewed slowly. "I appreciate the concern." Then came the test. Tessa looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the heavy oak wainscoting. "You know," she said, her voice light and teasing, "if this place were mine legally, I would probably paint all this wood white, make it look like a beach cottage, open it up, maybe knock down that wall to the kitchen." She paused, waiting. She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to scream that grandfather carved that wood himself. She wanted me to reveal that I cared too much, because if I cared too much, I was unstable. If I was unstable, I was easy to dismiss. I took a sip of water. "White is a very popular color," I said flatly. "It bounces the light well." Tessa blinked. She looked disappointed. She had thrown a dart and it had hit a wall of marshmallows. "Right," she said, recovering. "Exactly. Glad you agree." Grant cleared his throat. The pleasantries were over. Now came the extraction. "Speaking of the transition," Grant said, leaning forward, "we need to make sure the paperwork is clean for the handover on Friday. I was looking for the original property tax binders, the ones from 98 through 2005. Walter was obsessive about keeping them. Do you know where they are?" "And the safe key?" Elaine added, trying to sound casual. "The one for the wall safe in the study. I think I left a few pieces of jewelry in there years ago. I should probably get them out before the movers come." She hadn't left jewelry there. The safe contained the original deed to the land, the one hand-signed in 1945. They wanted the originals. They wanted to erase any paper trail that didn't match their narrative. I looked at them. 3 predators sitting around a table, napkins on their laps, asking me to hand over the knife they intended to stab me with. I widened my eyes, channeling every ounce of the overwhelmed daughter persona they had assigned to me. "I am not sure," I stammered. "I started moving boxes around last week. Everything is in such a mess. There are piles everywhere. I think I saw the tax binder in the garage, or maybe the attic." "The attic?" Grant's eye twitched. He hated the attic. It was dusty and hot. "I am sorry," I said, dropping my head. "I am just so bad at organizing. You know me, always scatterbrained." "It is okay, sweetie," Elaine said through gritted teeth. "We can look for them together on Friday." "Oh," Tessa suggested. "I could go look now, while we have dessert." "The bulb is out in the attic," I lied. "It is pitch black up there, and there are bats." "Bats." Tessa recoiled. "Huge ones," I said. "I would hate for you to get bitten right before the wedding photos." Tessa sat back down. The immediate threat of physical search was averted, but I knew I had only bought time. Later that night, while Elaine was pretending to help me wash dishes, which really meant she was standing by the sink holding a towel while I did the scrubbing, I walked into the living room to collect the wine glasses. Tessa was sitting on the sofa, her phone illuminated in the dark. She didn't hear me approach on the thick rug. I stood behind the sofa for 3 seconds. That was all I needed. She wasn't on Instagram. She wasn't texting her fiancé. She was on a website with a garish yellow banner that read, "Quick Inheritance, Com, Expedited Estate Transfers Title Correction." I saw her thumb hovering over a button that said, "Upload Will." My blood ran cold, then hot. Miles had warned me about this. These were the document mill's automated legal services that didn't ask questions, didn't verify mental capacity, and didn't check for conflicting trusts. They just took a PDF and a credit card and generated a filing. "Is the Wi-Fi working okay?" I asked loudly. Tessa jumped so hard she almost dropped the phone. She slammed the screen against her chest, her eyes wide with guilt. "Jesus, Piper," she hissed. "Don't sneak up on people." "Sorry," I said. "Just wanted to get your glass." "I was just checking work emails," she lied, her face flushing pink. "You work too hard," I said. I took the glass and walked back to the kitchen. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. They weren't just greedy. They were reckless. Tessa was about to feed my grandfather's legacy into a meat grinder of automated law just to save a few weeks of probate. That was the moment I decided the passive defense wasn't enough. The next morning, Thursday, I ramped up the physical security. I had already installed the biometric deadbolts, but I had kept them in dummy mode, meaning they still accepted the old physical keys. I didn't want to lock them out completely until the trap was sprung. But now, I needed eyes. I spent the morning installing micro cameras. I didn't put them in the obvious places. I put one inside the hollowed-out spine of a book on the hallway shelf. I put one in the ventilation grate overlooking the kitchen. I put one facing the driveway, hidden in the birdhouse. These weren't just for security. They were for the audience I hoped to never need a judge. By Thursday afternoon, the nice act began to crumble. The deadline was 24 hours away, and they still didn't have the tax binders, the safe combination, or the feeling that I was truly packing. Elaine called me at 2 in the afternoon. Her voice had lost the sing-song quality of the lasagna dinner. "Piper," she said, no greeting. "I am sending a list of items you need to leave behind. The movers need to know what to wrap and what to trash." "Okay," I said. "And listen," she said, her voice dropping. "We need to talk about the car. Dad says the title for the sedan is in Walter's name. You can't drive it off the property on Friday. It is part of the estate assets." They were going to strand me. They were going to kick me out of the house and take the car, so I would have to walk down the highway with my suitcases. "I understand," I said. "I will leave the keys on the counter." "Good," she said. "We just want this to be clean. Don't make it hard. Piper, we are all tired." "I am tired too." "Mom," I said honestly. "We will be there tomorrow at 5 sharp," she said. "Make sure the driveway is clear for the truck." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the silence of the house. I looked at the car keys on the table. The sedan was indeed in Walter's name, but what they didn't know because they hadn't asked was that Walter had transferred the title to the trust along with the house. The car wasn't theirs. It was mine to manage, but I would leave it in the garage. Let them think they had grounded me. The sun began to set on Thursday evening. The house groaned as the temperature dropped, the timbers contracting in the cool air. It was a sound I would miss if I ever actually left, but I wasn't leaving. I was sitting on the floor of the empty living room. I had moved all my personal furniture into the locked master suite to stage the move-out appearance when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tessa. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a joke. It was a command. Tessa. We are coming early tomorrow, noon, bringing the notary and the final release forms. Don't leave until you sign. Talking in person is easier. I stared at the screen. Noon. They were moving the timeline up. They were anxious. They probably realized that the online filing hadn't processed instantly, or maybe they just wanted to catch me off guard. They were bringing a notary to force a signature. They were going to corner me in the kitchen, put a pen in my hand, and use the sheer weight of 3 against 1 to bully me into signing away my rights. I typed a reply, then deleted it. I didn't need to reply. I stood up and walked to the front door. I looked at the keypad. I punched in the sequence that took the lock out of dummy mode and into fortress mode. Beep, beep, whir, click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Let them come at noon. Let them bring their notary. Let them bring their fake smiles and their lasagna dishes and their greed. I wasn't going to be the daughter who served tea and apologized for taking up space. Tomorrow, for the first time in 28 years, I was going to be the one who opened the door, or more accurately, the one who decided if it opened at all. The Friday morning sky over Harbor Hollow was not just gray. It was the color of a bruised lung. The fog had rolled in off the water overnight, thick and suffocating, erasing the horizon line where the lake met the sky. It was the kind of weather that made sounds travel too far: the snap of a twig, the cry of a heron, the crunch of tires on gravel. I was standing in the foyer, watching the driveway monitor I had hidden in the bookshelf. It was exactly noon. They were punctual. I had to give them that. When it came to taking things that didn't belong to them, the young family operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. The black SUV emerged from the mist like a shark surfacing. It didn't park in the designated guest spot. It pulled right up to the front steps, the tires crushing the edge of the lawn. This was no longer a visit. This was an occupation. I watched them get out. They didn't move like a family coming to visit a relative. They moved like a board of directors arriving for a hostile takeover. They stood close together, shoulder to shoulder, a unified front of beige trench coats and grim determination. They had rehearsed this. I could see it in the way Elaine adjusted Grant's collar, in the way Tessa checked her reflection in the car window before turning to the house. I opened the front door before they could ring the bell. I wanted to control the threshold. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind me. I heard the soft, electronic click of the biometric lock engaging. They didn't hear it. They were too busy looking at me. "Morning," I said. My voice was flat, carried away by the damp wind. They didn't say hello. Tessa stepped forward. She was the tip of the spear today. In her hand, she held a sheaf of papers, clipped together with a heavy metal binder clip. The top page was thick, official-looking, with a stamp that looked impressively legal to the untrained eye. "It is done," Tessa said. Her voice was trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of victory. "The transfer is recorded. The house is in my name. Piper, legally." She thrust the papers toward me, but she didn't let go of them. She held them out like a shield, or perhaps a holy relic that would burn me if I touched it. I looked at the papers. I didn't need to read them to know what they were. It was the printout from the online service she had used 2 nights ago. It was a generated deed with a pending submission stamp from the county clerk's automated portal. To her, it looked like ownership. To me, it looked like evidence of fraud. "You filed it," I said. "We had to," Grant interjected. He was standing slightly behind Tessa, his arms crossed over his chest, looking everywhere but at my eyes. "We couldn't wait for you to drag your feet anymore. Piper, we have a responsibility to this family's assets." "Assets," I repeated. "Don't look at us like that," Elaine said. Her voice was soft. that terrifyingly gentle tone she used when she was delivering the worst news. She stepped up beside Tessa and looked at me with pity. "This isn't personal, honey. You know that, right? We love you, but you are stuck here. We are freeing you." "Freeing me," I said. "You have a life in the city," Grant said, his voice gaining strength. He gestured vaguely toward the driveway, toward the road that led away from Harbor Hollow. "You have your little apartment. You have your friends. You don't belong in a place like this. It is too big. It is too old. It requires capital you simply don't have." Tessa waved the papers again. The paper made a sharp, snapping sound in the wind. "The point is," Tessa said, her eyes hard, "it is over. The deed is filed. I am the owner of record as of this morning, so I am not asking you any more. Piper, I am telling you." She took a breath, puffing up her chest. "You need to be out. The trucks are coming." I looked at her. I looked at the way she stood, legs apart, claiming the porch my grandfather had built. I looked at the triumphant smirk she couldn't quite suppress. She thought she had won. She thought the piece of paper in her hand was a magic spell that erased my existence. I could have screamed. I could have told them right then that their filing was invalid, that the trust predated their claim, that they were committing a felony by trying to transfer a title they didn't hold. But Miles's voice was in my head. Let them overplay their hand. So I did the only thing that would make them feel truly safe. I surrendered. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face fall. I looked down at my boots, then back up at the house, letting my eyes water just enough to look defeated. "Okay," I whispered. The word hung in the damp air. Tessa blinked. She had expected a fight. She had prepared a speech about lawsuits and mental competency hearings. My submission threw her off balance for a second. "Okay," she asked, suspicious. "You are right," I said, lifting my hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I can't fight you. I don't have the money for a lawyer, and if the papers are signed, then they are signed." I saw the tension drain out of Grant's body. He let out a long, loud exhale. "Thank God," he said. "Thank God you are finally seeing reason. Piper, this is for the best. You will see." Elaine rushed forward and hugged me. It was a stiff, awkward hug. She smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. "I am so proud of you," she murmured into my ear. "You are doing the right thing. We will make sure you get a little something from the estate later. To help with your rent." "A little something. Rent?" I pulled away gently. "When are the movers coming?" Tessa checked her watch. Back in command mode. "I had to reschedule the big truck because of the weather forecast for tomorrow. They are coming in 48 hours. Sunday morning, 8 o'clock sharp." 48 hours, I said. "Yes," Tessa said. "So that gives you 2 more days to get your personal things out. Anything left in the house on Sunday morning becomes property of the new owner. That is standard legal procedure." It wasn't standard legal procedure. It was theft. But I nodded. "I understand," I said. "Sunday morning?" "We will be back then to supervise the load-in," Tessa said. She tucked the papers back into her bag, patting it affectionately. "I want to do a final walkthrough on Sunday before the crew starts. I want to mark which walls are coming down." "Okay," I said again. "Well," Grant said, rubbing his hands together. "That went better than expected. Let's go get lunch. We should celebrate." He looked at me. For a second, I thought he might invite me. "You should get packing," he said. "I will," I said. "Bye, sweetie," Elaine called out, already walking toward the car. "Don't work too hard." I stood on the porch and watched them leave. I watched them climb back into the black SUV. I watched Tessa laughing at something Grant said. I watched them back out of the driveway, confident that they had crushed the rebellion without firing a single shot. They thought the silence from the house was the silence of an empty room. They didn't know it was the silence of a held breath. As soon as their taillights vanished into the fog, I turned around. I placed my thumb on the scanner. The lock chirped a happy, mechanical sound and the deadbolt slid back. I walked inside and locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the truth. I walked into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I went to the drawer where I kept the silverware, the everyday forks and spoons, not the fancy silver Elaine was worried about. I reached to the very back of the drawer, underneath the plastic tray, and pulled out a hidden compartment. Inside was a single envelope. It was handwritten. To Piper. For when the storm comes. It was Walter's handwriting. I had read it a dozen times, but I needed to read it again. I needed to wash the taste of their fake kindness out of my mouth. I opened the letter. My dearest Piper, if you are reading this, then my fears were justified. They have come for the house. They have come for the money. They have told you that you are not enough. I want you to remember something. This house is not made of wood and stone. It is made of the days we spent here. It is made of the safety we built when the world was too loud. Your parents and your sister, they confuse value with price. They think ownership is about a piece of paper, but ownership is about care. You are the only one who ever cared. Do not let them write the end of this story. I built the foundation, but you are the one who has to hold the roof up. Do not apologize for protecting what is yours. Love, Grandpa. I folded the letter. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I won't let them, I whispered to the empty room. I promise. I took a deep breath. The time for sentiment was over. The time for action had arrived. I pulled out my phone. I opened the encrypted chat with Miles. I typed 3 sentences. They were just here. They claimed ownership based on a fraudulent filing. They are returning in 48 hours with a moving crew. I hit send. Then I opened the contact for the witness the process server Miles had arranged. I sent a pin of my location. Sunday, 800 hours. Be ready. I walked back to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see the gray outline of the driveway where their car had been. They had given me 48 hours to vacate. They thought they were being generous. They thought they were giving me time to retreat. They were wrong. They had given me 48 hours to dig the trench deeper. I placed my hand on the cold brass of the doorknob. Come back on Sunday, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. Bring your trucks. Bring your papers. Bring your arrogance. I twisted the deadbolt, feeling the solid steel engage with the frame. It was a heavy final sound. But this door, I said to the ghosts of my family, is not going to open the way you think it is. I walked away from the door and headed toward the basement. I had a lot of work to do before Sunday. If they wanted a show, I was going to give them one. But the script they were following had been rewritten, and they had no idea they were walking onto a stage where the trapdoor was already unlatched. Sunday morning arrived not with the warmth of the sun, but with the hydraulic hiss of air brakes. I was sitting in the foyer, drinking coffee from a travel mug, when the house shook. It was a subtle vibration, rattling the window panes just enough to disturb the dust motes dancing in the light. I checked the monitor hidden in the bookshelf. A massive moving truck, painted a bright, aggressive yellow, was backing up the driveway. It was taking up the entire width of the road, scraping the rhododendrons on both sides. Behind it, the black SUV followed like a commander's vehicle inspecting the front lines. It was exactly 8 in the morning. I stood up. I smoothed down my jeans. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a woman who was done waiting. Beside me, standing in the shadows of the living room archway, was Mr. Arthur Vance. Mr. Vance was a man who looked like he had been born in a filing cabinet. He was wearing a gray suit that was slightly too large for his frame, and he held a thick, leather-bound folder against his chest. He was a senior process server and a notary for the county, a man Miles had worked with for 30 years. He had the personality of a concrete block, which was exactly what I needed. They are here, I said. Vance checked his watch. Right on schedule. Let's proceed. I unlocked the deadbolt, the manual one, not the biometric one, which I had disengaged 10 minutes ago to allow us to exit smoothly. Outside, I could hear car doors slamming. I heard Tessa's voice, high and piercing, cutting through the morning air. Just back it up to the porch, she was shouting. We want to load the big furniture first. The piano goes. The sideboard goes. Careful with the suspension, Grant's voice added. That driveway hasn't been paved in 10 years. I opened the door. The sound of the moving truck's engine was deafening. 2 men in blue jumpsuits were already pulling the metal ramp out from the back of the truck. They looked bored, tired, and ready to heave heavy objects. Tessa was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, holding a clipboard. She looked up when the door opened, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Good morning," she called out, though her eyes were cold. "We are starting early. We want to be done before noon so the guys can beat the traffic back to the city." Elaine was standing by the hydrangeas, holding a coffee cup. "Piper, make sure your boxes are separated. We don't want to accidentally load your personal items onto the truck going to storage." Grant was already walking toward the movers, pointing at the front door. "Start with the living room. There is a leather armchair." "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Grant ignored me. "And a grandfather clock. Pad them well." "I said stop," I said, louder this time. Tessa rolled her eyes and marched up the steps. "Piper, don't start. We talked about this. It is moving day. Don't make it dramatic." She reached for the door handle, intending to breeze past me. I stepped sideways, blocking the entrance, and as I moved, Mr. Vance stepped out from behind me. The effect was instantaneous. Tessa stopped mid-step, her hand hovering inches from the door. Grant froze near the truck. Elaine lowered her coffee cup. They were expecting a crying daughter. They were not expecting a 60-year-old man with a badge on his belt and a folder that looked like a legal weapon. "Who is this?" Tessa demanded, her tone shifting from arrogance to annoyance. "Is this your boyfriend?" Piper seriously. "Mr. Vance didn't smile. He didn't blink. He opened his folder and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you Tessa Marie Young?" he asked. His voice was dry, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of the state. Tessa frowned. "Yes. Who are you?" Vance ignored her question. He looked past her to the driveway. "And you are Grant Edward Young and Elaine Susan Young." "I am Grant Young," my father said, walking toward the porch, his chest puffed out. "I am the executor of this estate. Who the hell are you? And why are you blocking my movers?" Vance looked at the movers. "Gentlemen, I would advise you to halt operations immediately. You are currently trespassing on private property involved in an active legal dispute." The 2 movers looked at each other. The taller one shrugged, dropped the end of the ramp with a loud clang, and leaned against the truck. They knew the drill. If the suits were arguing, the clock was ticking, but the lifting stopped. "Dispute," Grant laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "There is no dispute. Show him the papers." "Tessa." Tessa whipped out her file, the same one she had waved at me on Friday. "I have the deed right here. I am the owner of record. I filed it electronically on Wednesday. This house is mine. This man," she pointed a manicured finger at Vance, "is trespassing. Piper, get out of the way." Vance looked at the paper in her hand. He didn't take it. He just glanced at it with the look of a jeweler spotting a piece of glass in a display of diamonds. "That document," Vance said calmly, "is invalid." "Excuse me," Tessa screeched. "It has the county stamp." "It has an automated provisional receipt stamp," Vance corrected her. "It was flagged 48 hours ago by the clerk's office for a fatal title conflict." He pulled a document from his own folder. It was thick, bound in blue paper, and bore a raised gold seal that caught the morning light. "This," Vance announced, "is the certified deed of trust for the Walter and June Young Irrevocable Trust. It was executed and recorded 3 weeks ago, immediately following the death of Mr. Walter Young. It predates your filing." He looked at the group, his eyes hard. "The sole trustee and legal beneficiary with lifetime rights of residency is Ms. Piper Young. She is the only person with the authority to authorize entry or removal of assets." Silence slammed into the porch. It was heavier than the truck. Elaine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Grant looked like he had been punched in the gut. Tessa shook her head. her face turning a blotchy red. That is a lie. That is impossible. Grandfather left everything to Mom and Dad. We have the will from 2015. That will, Vance said, flipping a page, was superseded by the creation of the trust. Assets placed in an irrevocable trust are no longer part of the probate estate. Your parents have no authority here. Neither do you. You are lying, Tessa shouted. She turned to the movers. Load the truck. I am paying you, ignore him. The movers didn't move. The tall one lit a cigarette. Sorry, lady. We don't touch domestic disputes. Company policy. Call us when the cops sort it out. I will call the cops, Tessa screamed, fumbling for her phone. Please do, Vance said. I have the trespass warnings prepared right here. Grant stepped up the stairs, his face purple. He got right in Vance's face. Now listen here. You bureaucrat. You can't just wave a piece of paper and steal my inheritance. My father built this house. I grew up here. And you are attempting to loot it, Vance said. He didn't back down an inch. I am here as an officer of the court to witness the condition of the property. Any attempt to force entry will be recorded as breaking and entering. Any attempt to remove items will be recorded as grand larceny. Grant looked at me. For the first time, he really looked at me. He didn't see the daughter he could bully. He saw the wall I had built. Piper, he growled. What did you do? I stepped forward, moving in front of Vance. I looked my father in the eye. I did what Grandpa told me to do, I said. I protected the house. You went behind our backs, Elaine wailed. She started to cry. But it wasn't the soft, sympathetic crying she did at funerals. It was the ugly, panicked crying of someone watching $1 million evaporate. We are family. How could you do this to your sister? She needs this place. She doesn't need it, I said calmly. She wants to sell it. She wants to flip it. I heard you. Mom, I heard all of you. We were doing what was best for everyone, Elaine sobbed. Why are you being so cruel? Why are you humiliating us like this? Humiliating you. I tilted my head. You showed up with a moving truck to throw me onto the street. You forged a deed. You tried to steal the car. You lied to my face for 3 weeks. I pointed at the yellow truck. Family doesn't bring a demolition crew to dinner. Mom. Family doesn't give you 48 hours to vacate your own home. Tessa was frantically scrolling on her phone, presumably checking the status of her online filing. She stopped. Her face went pale. She had found it. The rejection notice. The title-clouded alert she had ignored because she was too arrogant to check her spam folder. She looked up at me, and the venom in her eyes was toxic. You trapped us, she hissed. You let us file that. You knew. I let you show me who you really are, I said. I turned to the movers who were watching the show with mild interest. Gentlemen, I called out, there is no move happening today. You can send the cancellation fee bill to Ms. Tessa Young. She is the one who booked you. The tall mover nodded, flicked his cigarette onto the driveway. I would pick it up later and signaled his partner. Pack it up, boys. We are rolling. The sound of the ramp sliding back into the truck was the sound of a gavel coming down. Clang. Grant watched the truck engine revving. He looked at the papers in Vance's hand. He looked at the biometric lock on the door. He realized, finally, that the physical force he relied on was gone. He turned back to me. His face wasn't purple anymore. It was gray, cold, and terrifyingly calm. You think you are smart, Grant said. His voice was low, a snake sliding through dry grass. You think because you got a lawyer and signed some papers, you have won. The law says I have, I said. The law. Grant spat on the porch step. We raised you. We paid for your school. We carried you. And now you are trying to bury me, I said. Please leave. Mr. Vance is recording the time. Grant laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He stepped closer, leaning in so only I could hear him, ignoring Vance. You can keep the house, Piper, he whispered. Keep the wood. Keep the stone. Rot in here with the memories for all I care. He smiled. and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. But you forgot one thing. You were so busy locking down the real estate. You forgot about the rest of the life you left in the city. My stomach tightened. What are you talking about? The storage unit, Grant said softly. The one near your university apartment. The one you put all your research in, your master's thesis data, the hard drives, the art portfolio. I froze. I had rented a unit to store my things while I was down here caring for Grandpa. The lease was up for renewal last week, Grant said, his eyes gleaming with malice. The reminder went to the family mailing address. I didn't pay it. He paused, savoring the look on my face. In fact, he continued, I canceled it, and since I was the guarantor on the original contract from when you were a student, I authorized them to clear it out, auction it off. Yesterday. He stepped back, straightening his coat. So enjoy your big empty house. Piper, I hope it is worth losing everything you actually worked for. He turned to Elaine and Tessa, who were staring at him in confusion. Get in the car. We are leaving. But Dad, Tessa started. I said get in the car, Grant roared. They scrambled into the SUV. I stood on the porch, my hands trembling. The victory of saving the house suddenly felt like ash in my mouth. My research, my portfolio, 5 years of work, gone. Mr. Vance stepped up beside me. Ms. They are leaving. I watched the black SUV tear down the driveway, following the retreating moving truck. He is lying, I whispered, trying to convince myself. He has to be lying. But as I looked at the dust settling in the driveway, I remembered the way Grant played the game. He never bluffed. If he said he burned a bridge, he didn't just burn it. He blew it up while you were still standing on it. I had won the battle for Harbor Hollow, but Grant had just told me that he had nuked my future to do it. The yellow moving truck had been gone for 24 hours, but the dust it kicked up hadn't settled. It had just changed forms. Monday morning didn't bring peace. It brought a courier. He arrived at 10 o'clock, driving a nondescript white sedan. He didn't come to the front door. He walked to the gate I had locked the night before and buzzed the intercom. I walked down the driveway to meet him, gravel crunching under my boots. Piper Young? He asked. Yes. He handed me a thick envelope. It wasn't from the family. It was from a law firm in the city Sterling. Holloway Associates. I knew the name. They were aggressive corporate litigators, the kind of firm you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. I took the envelope. It felt heavy, like holding a brick. You have been served, the man said, and drove away. I didn't open it until I was back inside the kitchen, with the biometric locks engaged and the security cameras recording. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sliced open the seal. I expected a lawsuit contesting the validity of the trust. I expected them to claim the signature was forged or the date was wrong. I was wrong. They weren't attacking the paper. They were attacking the person holding it. The header read, Petition for removal of trustee and emergency appointment of guardian ad litem. I scanned the legalese, my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. They were filing a motion to have me removed as trustee of the Walter and June Young Irrevocable Trust. Their grounds lack of capacity, undue influence, financial mismanagement. I read the affidavit attached to the filing. It was signed by Elaine Young. Petitioner states that the respondent, Piper Young, has a history of emotional instability and isolation. Petitioner asserts that the respondent took advantage of the decedent's diminished mental state while isolating him from the rest of the family to coerce the execution of trust documents. Furthermore, the respondent is currently unemployed and lacks the financial literacy required to manage an estate of this magnitude. I had to put the paper down on the counter because I thought I might tear it in half. They were painting a picture of me as a predator, a confused, unstable girl who whispered poison into a dying man's ear while locking his loving family out. It was a rewrite of history so audacious it took my breath away. I picked up my phone to call Miles, but the screen lit up with a notification before I could dial. It was a text from my cousin, Sarah, who lived in Ohio. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, but we used to be close. Sarah Piper. Is it true Aunt Elaine just called me? She said you are planning to sell the Harbor Hollow house to a condo developer, and that you wouldn't let them in to get Grandpa's journals. I stared at the screen. So that was the narrative. They weren't just fighting me in court. They were poisoning the water in the village. They knew the extended family cherished this house. By telling everyone I was selling to a developer a lie so specific it had to be calculated, they were turning the entire young clan against me, Piper. That is a lie. Sarah, I am keeping the house. They are the ones who wanted to flip it. Sarah, that is not what Tessa said. She posted a long thing on Facebook about how heartbroken she is, that greed has destroyed the family legacy. Piper, people are really upset. I didn't reply. I couldn't fight a social media war. I had to fight a legal one. I called Miles. I have the letter, I said as soon as he picked up. I have a copy too, Miles said. His voice was grim. They are playing dirty. Piper. This is the nuclear option. Challenging a trust is hard. So they are trying to destroy your character instead. If they can prove you are incompetent, or that you manipulated Walter, a judge could strip you of the trusteeship and appoint guess who? Grant, I said. Grant. Miles confirmed. Or a neutral third party, who would eventually liquidate the assets to pay for the legal fees incurred by the dispute. Grant told me he canceled my storage unit, I said, my voice shaking with sudden rage. He told me he authorized them to auction my master's thesis, my portfolio, everything. Did you check? Miles asked sharply. I called this morning, I said. He did try. He called the facility on Saturday pretending to be me, claiming I lost my key and wanted to terminate the lease, but because the account has a 2-step verification passcode, my mother's maiden name, which he guessed wrong, they flagged it. My stuff is safe. But the attempt, Miles, he tried to erase my professional life. Good, Miles said. Good? It proves malice, Miles said. A loving father doesn't try to auction his daughter's education 2 days after a funeral. We will subpoena the call logs from the storage facility. We will add it to the pile. They are trying to say I am incompetent, I said. How do I prove I am not? By being the most competent person in the room, Miles said. They are going to try to provoke you. They want you to send angry texts. They want you to scream in public. They want to show the judge a hysterical woman. Do not give them that. I hung up. I felt like the walls of the house were closing in. I walked into the living room, the room where yesterday Mr. Vance had stood like a shield. Now, the threat felt ghostlier. My phone pinged again. An email alert. Security warning, multiple failed login attempts detected for account Harbor Hollow Utilities. I clicked the link. Someone had tried to access the electric and water accounts 5 times in the last hour. The IP address was local. They were trying to get into the utility accounts. Why? Then it hit me. If they could log in, they could cancel the autopay. They could turn off the lights. They could stop the heating oil delivery. And then, in court, they could present the shutoff notices as proof that I was failing to maintain the asset. I immediately logged in and changed the passwords to a random string of 30 characters. I set up a hardware security key requirement. Nice try, Tessa, I whispered. Then came the good cop routine. My phone buzzed with a message from Elaine. Elaine Piper, please, this has gone too far. Dad is furious. He wants to drag this out for years. I don't want to see your name dragged through the mud in court. The lawyers are talking about requesting your medical records, about that time you saw the therapist in college. I froze. I had seen a counselor for anxiety during my sophomore year finals. It was normal. It was healthy. But Elaine was weaponizing it. She was threatening to air my private medical history in a public hearing to paint me as unstable. Elaine. Just sign a settlement. We can split the house 3 ways. We will drop the lawsuit. No one needs to know about your episodes. I can protect your reputation. Please, honey, let me be your mom. The audacity was breathtaking. She was holding the gun and promising to save me from the bullet if I just handed over the wallet. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. I saved it to the folder named The Evidence. I needed air. I needed to think. I walked into grandfather's study. The room still smelled of his pipe tobacco and old leather. I sat in his chair, the same chair Grant had tried to claim. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one where he kept his thinking tapes. Walter used to record his thoughts on a dictaphone. He said his hand shook too much to write in the evenings, so he spoke to the machine. I had listened to most of them, but there was one small cassette in a case labeled, "Just in Case." I had found it a week ago but hadn't had the courage to play it. It felt too final. But now, with their accusations of undue influence ringing in my ears, I needed to hear him. I put the tape into the player and pressed play. The magnetic tape hissed for a moment, and then Walter's voice filled the room. It was weak, breathless, but the mind behind it was sharp as a tack. "It is March 3rd. I am recording this because I know my son." I closed my eyes. "Grant was here today," Walter's voice continued. "He brought papers. He wanted power of attorney. He told me I was confused. He told me I was forgetting things. I told him the only thing I have forgotten is why I lent him that money in '99. A dry, raspy chuckle. "I am not confused. I am dying. There is a difference. But they will try to say, I didn't know what I was doing when I gave the house to Piper. They will say she tricked me. They will say she is weak." The tape hissed again. "Piper, if you are listening to this, it means they have started the mudslinging. It means they are attacking your character because they can't attack your rights. Listen to me closely. In the blue binder, under the insurance policies, there is a log. I kept a log of every time they visited in the last 5 years. Dates, times, duration." I sat up straight. "A log. You will see the pattern," Walter said. "They visited 20 times in 5 years. You visited 300 times. You didn't influence me. Piper, you were just the only one who showed up. That is not manipulation. That is love. Take the log. Show the judge. Let them argue with the calendar." The tape clicked off. I scrambled to the bookshelf. I found the blue binder. I had looked through it before but missed the thin, black notebook tucked into the back pocket. I opened it. It was exactly as he said. Walter, with his meticulous carpenter's brain, had recorded every interaction. Dec 24, 2022. Grant and Elaine arrived 2:00 p.m., left 4:15 p.m., complained about the heating cost, did not ask about June's chemo. Jan 15, 2023. Piper arrived, stayed weekend, fixed the back step, cooked soup. Feb 10, 2023. Tessa called, asked for loan, 10 minutes, page after page, a concrete, irrefutable timeline of neglect versus care. This wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger of emotional bankruptcy. "Undue influence," I whispered, tracing the entries. "I didn't influence him. You ignored him. I took photos of the log. I scanned the pages. I uploaded them to the secure server. Then I called Miles. "I have something," I said. "I have a logbook, written in Walter's hand. It documents every visit for 5 years. It proves they were absent and I was the primary caregiver. It proves he was lucid enough to track their neglect." "That is excellent," Miles said, the excitement evident in his voice. "That goes to the state of mind. It destroys the isolation narrative. If they claim you isolated him, we show the log proving they simply chose not to come." "I am ready," I said. "When do we fight this?" "I just got off the phone with their counsel," Miles said. "They are pushing for an emergency injunction. They want a hearing this Thursday. They want to freeze the trust assets immediately." "Thursday," I said. 3 days? "They are betting you will fold before then," Miles warned. "They are betting the threat of the courtroom will make you sign the settlement Elaine sent. They think you are too scared to stand up in front of a judge and speak." I looked at the camera feed on my monitor. The driveway was empty, the house was quiet, but inside, the evidence was screaming. I thought about the storage unit they tried to auction. I thought about the mental instability lies. I thought about the way they looked at me on the porch like I was a bug to be crushed. "Let them bet," I said. "Piper, this will be ugly," Miles said softly. They will say terrible things about you on the record, things you can't unhear. I have been hearing them my whole life, Miles, I said. They just usually whispered them in the kitchen. I would prefer they say them into a microphone where I can rebut them. Okay, Miles said. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, County Superior Court, wear something boring. I hung up. I walked to the window and looked out at the fog lifting off Harbor Hollow. The view was clear now. The gray water looked like steel. They wanted to paint me as the fragile, crazy daughter who stole a fortune. They wanted to make me the villain of the story. Fine, if they wanted a villain, I would show them what a villain looked like. A villain was someone who kept the receipts. A villain was someone who didn't cry when you threatened them. A villain was someone who walked into court, not with a plea for mercy, but with a logbook of their sins. I went to the closet and pulled out my suit. It was navy blue, sharp, professional. Thursday wasn't going to be a hearing. It was going to be a reckoning. The night before the hearing, the house felt like a ship holding its breath before a hurricane. I sat at the mahogany dining table, the surface covered in paper. To anyone else, it looked like a chaotic mess of receipts, screenshots, and legal forms. To me, it was a map of the last 5 years. I had printed everything. The text messages where Grant called the house a money pit, the photos of the yellow moving truck blocking the driveway, the logbook entries from Walter's black notebook, the automated rejection letter from the county clerk regarding Tessa's fraudulent filing. My printer had been humming for 2 hours, spitting out the physical proof of my family's betrayal. I picked up a photo of Tessa standing on the porch, her face twisted in that ugly, triumphant sneer. I looked at it for a long time. I wasn't looking at my sister anymore. I was looking at a stranger who shared my DNA. I stood up and walked away from the table. I needed to feel the house one last time before I had to defend it. I walked through the darkened rooms without turning on the lights. I knew the geography of this place better than I knew the lines on my own palm. I walked into the sunroom, where the wicker furniture still held the faint scent of June's lavender perfume. I touched the cold glass of the window. I am ready, I whispered to the dark. But was I? I walked back to the kitchen and opened my laptop. I had one final stone to turn over. Earlier that afternoon, while reviewing the financial records for the trust defense, I had stumbled upon something odd. In the shared family cloud drive a digital storage space I had set up for my parents 3 years ago to help them organize their taxes. There was a new folder. It was labeled simply Liquid. My parents were not tech-savvy. They likely forgot I still had administrator access to the drive. They thought deleting me from their lives meant unfriending me on Facebook, not revoking permissions on a server I built. I clicked on the folder. Inside, there were 3 PDF documents. They were dated within the last 2 months. The first was a notice from a bank in the city. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a notice of default. I read the numbers, and my breath hitched. Grant and Elaine were behind on the mortgage for their penthouse in the city. Not just a little behind. They were 6 months behind. The bank was threatening foreclosure proceedings if the balance of $85,000 wasn't brought current within 30 days. 30 days. The deadline on the bank notice was exactly 4 days from now. I opened the second document. It was a letter from a private equity firm. Grant had taken out a high-interest business loan 2 years ago, $500,000 collateralized against his future inheritance. He had borrowed money against a house he didn't own yet. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The rush to evict me, the move out by Friday deadline, the sheer frantic aggression of their takeover. It wasn't just greed, it was panic. They weren't trying to steal the house because they wanted a summer getaway or because they wanted to renovate the kitchen. They were trying to steal it because they were drowning. They needed to liquidate the Harbor Hollow estate immediately to pay off their debts before they lost their own home and their social standing. "Oh, Dad," I whispered, staring at the screen. "You are broke." It made sense now. The fairness argument, the pressure on Tessa to get the deed. They were using Tessa as the vehicle to get the title, knowing that if Grant took it directly, his creditors might seize it immediately. By putting it in Tessa's name, they thought they could sell it quietly and funnel the cash back to cover their holes. But that led to the second question. Why was Tessa going along with it? Tessa was selfish. Yes, but she wasn't a criminal. She was risk-averse. Filing a fraudulent deed was a felony. Who pushed her to do it? I went back to the https://w google.com/search quickinheritance.com receipt I had found in the digital trash bin of the drive. I looked at the payment details again. I had assumed Tessa paid for it, but when I zoomed in on the credit card receipt, the last 4 digits didn't match any card I knew Tessa possessed, and the billing name wasn't Tessa Young. It was J. Thorne, Julian Thorne, Tessa's new fiancé, the entrepreneur she had been dating for 6 months. The one who was too busy closing a deal in Dubai to come to the funeral. I opened a new tab and started digging. I ran a background check on Julian Thorne. Not the Google search kind, but the deep dive kind using the paid database Miles had given me access to. It took 10 minutes. Julian Thorne didn't have deals in Dubai. He had a suspended real estate license in Florida. He had 2 civil judgments against him for title washing scams, convincing people to transfer deeds to shell companies for asset protection, then leveraging the properties for loans and vanishing. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty house. Tessa wasn't the mastermind. She was the mark. This Julian guy must have whispered in her ear. He probably told her he could handle the paperwork to help her parents. He probably told her the online service was a legitimate loophole. He was setting her up to take the fall for the fraud, while he likely planned to take the proceeds from the renovation loan she mentioned earlier. Twist number 2. My family was a nesting doll of disasters. Grant and Elaine were desperate debtors trying to loot the estate to save their reputation. Tessa was a manipulated puppet about to hand the keys over to a con artist, and I was the only one standing in the way of the entire house of cards collapsing. I saved the documents, the foreclosure notice, the business loan, the background check on Julian. I had the ammunition to destroy them. If I revealed the foreclosure in court, Grant's reputation in the city would be vaporized. If I revealed Julian's record, Tessa's engagement and her heart would be shattered. I sat back, my hands trembling. My phone rang. It was Miles. "Piper," he said. It was late, almost 11 at night. His voice sounded weary. "I just got off the phone with their lawyer again." "And they are offering a settlement," Miles said. "A new one. Better terms. They drop the incompetence suit. You keep the house. But you agree to take out a mortgage on the property for $500,000 and pay it to them as a settlement of claims. In exchange, they walk away." $500,000. Exactly the amount of Grant's business loan. "They are desperate, Miles," I said. "I found out why. They are facing foreclosure. Grant borrowed against the inheritance." Miles was silent for a long moment. "I see. That explains the urgency and the aggression. What should I do?" "If you accept," Miles said slowly, "the fighting stops. You keep the house, though it will be burdened with debt, but the family war ends. If we go into that courtroom tomorrow, Piper, if you use what you just found, you aren't just winning a case, you are nuking their lives." I looked at the darkness outside the window. "If I pay them," I said, "I am validating them. I am telling them that it is okay to bully me as long as they send a bill first. I am telling them that grandfather's wishes can be bought for $500,000. It is the path of least resistance," Miles reminded me. "No," I said. "Grandpa said, don't let them write the story. If I pay them, they write the story that I was scared, that I was guilty, that I owed them. So we proceed." "We proceed," I said. "But Miles, I am not going to use the foreclosure documents. Not yet." "Why not?" "It is the kill shot." "Because," I said, surprising myself, "I don't need to destroy them to save the house. I just need to tell the truth. I will keep the documents in my back pocket. If they lie on the stand, if they push me too far, then I will use them. But not before." "You are more merciful than they are," Miles said. "No," I said. "I just don't want to be them. Yielding once is opening the door forever. Miles, I am keeping the door shut." We hung up. The house was completely silent now. Midnight. I set up my phone on the kitchen counter. I hit record. I didn't plan to post this. I didn't plan to show it to the judge. I just needed to say it out loud. To make it real. My name is Piper Young, I told the camera lens. It is the night before the hearing. My parents are trying to declare me incompetent. My sister has accused me of theft. Tomorrow, I have to walk into a room and prove that I am a person worthy of trust. I took a shaky breath. I found out tonight that they are ruining themselves. They are broke. They are being scammed. Part of me wants to save them. Part of me wants to write them a check and make the scary yellow truck go away. But I can't. Because this house isn't an ATM. It is a sanctuary. And you don't burn down a sanctuary to pay for a mistake. I stopped the recording. I saved it. Evidence of sanity. My phone buzzed again. A text from Grant. He was awake too. Probably drinking scotch. Staring at his foreclosure notice. Grant. Last chance. Piper. The lawyers are ready to tear you apart tomorrow. We will bring up everything. The therapy. The grades. The time you got fired from the coffee shop. Do you really want the whole town to know you are crazy? Drop the trust. Sign the settlement, or you lose this family forever. I stared at the words. You lose this family forever. He thought that was a threat. He didn't realize that I had already lost them the day they chose money over me. He was threatening to take away something that no longer existed. I typed my reply. My fingers were steady. Piper family isn't the price to buy silence. Dad, and I am not buying. I sent it. I turned off the kitchen light. I was ready to go upstairs, to try to sleep for a few hours. When my phone rang, I frowned. It wasn't Miles. It wasn't Grant. It was a number I didn't recognize. A local area code, but not a contact I had saved. It was 12:15 in the morning. I hesitated, then swiped answer. Hello. Ms. Piper Young. The voice was male, deep, and official, not a lawyer, not a family member. Yes. This is Detective Miller from the County Fraud Investigation Unit. I apologize for the late hour, but we received a flag from the clerk's office regarding a property filing at your address. My heart stopped. Had Tessa called them? Had she tried to frame me? Yes. There is a dispute, I stammered. We have a hearing tomorrow. We know, the detective said. We have been monitoring the activity on that deed submission. We traced the IP address and the payment method. It triggered an alert in our system for a known pattern of elder abuse and title fraud. He paused. We will be at the hearing tomorrow. Ms. Young, not as observers. We have questions for a Mr. Julian Thorne, and we need to know if you are prepared to testify regarding your sister's involvement. I gripped the phone. My sister. We need to know if she is a victim or an accomplice, the detective said. See you in court, Ms. Young. The line went dead. I stood in the darkness, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. I had prepared for a civil battle about trusts and wills. I had prepared to defend my sanity. I wasn't prepared for a criminal investigation. Tomorrow wasn't just going to be a hearing. It was going to be an ambush, and I was the only one who knew the police were coming. County Superior Court. Courtroom 4B. Smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Miles. My hands were folded in my lap, resting on the navy blue fabric of my suit. Across the aisle, my family sat in a row. They looked impeccable. Elaine was wearing a soft gray dress that made her look fragile and maternal. Grant wore his best charcoal suit, the one he used for closing investors. Tessa was dressed in white, a calculated choice to suggest innocence. Her hair pulled back in a severe, respectful bun. They looked like the victims of a great tragedy. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who possessed a voice like oiled gravel, was halfway through his opening statement. Your Honor, Sterling said, gesturing toward me with a pitying, open hand. We are not here to vilify Ms. Young. We are here to help her. We have a young woman, merely 28, overwhelmed by grief, isolated in a decaying estate. making irrational decisions that jeopardize the legacy of her late grandparents. She has locked out her loving parents. She has refused reasonable communication. She is hoarding an asset she has neither the funds nor the mental stability to maintain. He paused for effect, looking at the judge. The family simply asks for the appointment of a guardian ad litem to oversee the trust, and for Mr. Grant Young to be reinstated as the executor of the property to prevent financial ruin. Elaine dabbed her eyes with a tissue. It was a masterclass in performance. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at Miles. "Counsel." Miles stood up. He didn't have the oily charm of Sterling. He had the weight of granite. He walked to the podium, placing a single, thin file on the stand. "Your Honor," Miles said, "the defense will not rely on emotional appeals. We will rely on the timeline." He turned to look at my family. Grant didn't blink. Tessa stared at the table. "The petitioner claims Ms. Young is irrational and isolated," Miles continued. "Yet, we have submitted into evidence Exhibit A, a logbook maintained by the late Walter Young." Miles held up the black notebook I had found in the study. "This log documents that in the last 5 years, the petitioners visited the deceased a total of 22 times. The respondent, Ms. Young, was present for 314 days. The claim of isolation is contradicted by the decedent's own hand. Piper didn't keep them away. They simply didn't care to visit until there was a will to read." Grant's jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Miles said, picking up a photograph, "they claim concern for the property, Exhibit B." He projected the image onto the court screen. It was the photo of the yellow moving truck blocking the driveway, with Grant and Tessa standing in the foreground, looking aggressive. "This photo was taken 48 hours ago," Miles said. "On a Sunday morning, the petitioners arrived with a commercial moving crew to forcibly empty the house. This was not a welfare check. This was a raid." Sterling jumped up. "Objection. My clients were merely securing assets for safekeeping." "Overruled," the judge said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the photo. "Continue." Miles nodded. "But the crux of this matter, Your Honor, is not about moving trucks. It is about fraud." The air in the room changed. It went from tense to vacuum-sealed. Miles picked up the document Tessa had waved in my face on the porch, the printout of the electronic deed filing. "The petitioners claim that the trust is invalid and that they are the rightful owners," Miles said. "To support this, Ms. Tessa Young attempted to file a quitclaim deed last Wednesday, transferring the property to herself." Miles turned to Tessa. She looked pale. "Ms. Young," Miles asked directly, though he was addressing the judge, "did you verify the title before you filed this deed?" Sterling interjected. "My client used a third-party service. She is not a lawyer. If there was a clerical error, it was unintentional." "It was not a clerical error," Miles said. His voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet. "It was a crime." He produced the receipt I had found, the one with the name J. Thorne. "We have here the receipt for the service quickinheritance.com, Miles said. "It was paid for by a credit card belonging to a Mr. Julian Thorne, a man with 2 prior civil judgments for title fraud." Tessa gasped. It was a small, sharp sound, like a balloon popping. She looked at Grant. Grant looked straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with her. "And," Miles continued, delivering the blow I had held back until this moment, "we have the email thread between Ms. Tessa Young and Mr. Thorne, recovered from the family's shared cloud drive." He held up a sheet of paper. In this email, dated 4 days ago, Ms. Young writes, "The trust is a problem. We need to override it before the county updates the registry. Can we backdate the deed?" The silence in the courtroom was absolute. To which Mr. Thorne replied, Miles read, "We will file it as a correction. It might get flagged, but it will buy you enough time to get into the house." Miles dropped the paper on the table. It made a loud slap. "They knew the trust was valid, Your Honor. They tried to bury it with a fraudulent filing to physically seize the house before this hearing could take place." The judge turned her gaze to the defense table. It wasn't a judicial look anymore. It was the look of a predator spotting prey. "Ms. Young," the judge said to Tessa, "is this email authentic?" Tessa started to shake. She looked at Julian Thorne's name on the evidence list. She looked at the detective sitting in the back row, Detective Miller, who had just offered a small, grim nod. "I didn't know," Tessa stammered. "Julian said it was standard procedure. He said we just needed to clean up the paperwork." "You asked to backdate a legal document," the judge said coldly. "That is not standard procedure. That is forgery." Grant slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "She was trying to save the house," Grant shouted, losing his composure completely. He stood up, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. "You don't understand. We have obligations. We have liquidity issues." Sterling tried to pull him down. "Mr. Young, sit down." "No," Grant roared, shaking him off. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is sitting on $1 million of equity while we are drowning. We just needed her to sign the split. If she had just signed the split, none of this would have happened." "Grant, stop," Elaine shrieked, grabbing his arm, but the words were out. "We just needed her to sign the split." Grant froze. He realized what he had said. He realized he had just admitted, on the record, that the entire incompetence lawsuit was a sham designed to force a financial settlement. The judge looked at Grant. Then she looked at the foreclosure documents Miles had handed to the bailiff as a supplemental evidence packet, the documents I had found the night before, showing Grant's desperation. "So," the judge said, her voice icy, "this is not about your daughter's mental health. This is about your debts." Grant sank back into his chair. He looked small. The charcoal suit suddenly looked like a costume he had outgrown. "Your Honor," Miles said softly, "the defense rests." The judge didn't need a recess. She didn't need to consult looking at her notes. She looked at my family with unmasked disgust. "The petition for removal of trustee is denied with prejudice," she ruled. "The trust stands. Ms. Piper Young is the sole legal authority over the Harbor Hollow estate." She turned her eyes to Tessa. "Regarding the fraudulent filing and the email evidence, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate review. Detective Miller is present in the court. I believe—" "Yes, Your Honor," the detective called out from the back. Tessa put her head in her hands and began to sob. This time, it wasn't a performance. It was the terrified sound of a golden child realizing the safety net had been cut. "And Mr. Grant Young," the judge continued, "I am issuing a permanent restraining order. You are barred from coming within 500 feet of the property or Ms. Piper Young. If you attempt to access the utilities, the accounts, or the premises again, you will be held in contempt and incarcerated." She banged her gavel. Bang. "Court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel was the sound of the final door closing. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I didn't stumble. My family remained seated. They looked like a painting that had been left out in the rain colors running, forms dissolving. Elaine stood up slowly. She walked over to the barrier separating the tables. She didn't look at Grant. She didn't look at Tessa. She looked at me. Her face was twisted in a mixture of grief and rage. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed. "We gave you life. We gave you everything. And you let them do this to your sister. You let them destroy your father." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had smiled while telling me to move out by Friday. I looked at the woman who had threatened to use my therapy records against me. "I didn't do this, Mom," I said. My voice was steady. "I didn't borrow money against a house I didn't own. I didn't hire a con artist to forge a deed. And I didn't bring a moving truck to a funeral." "We are family," she cried out, clutching her pearls. "No," I said. "You were a corporation, and you just went bankrupt." I turned my back on her. "Piper," she screamed. I kept walking. I walked past Grant, who was staring at the floor, muttering about interest rates. I walked past Tessa, who was being approached by Detective Miller. I walked out of the double doors of the courtroom and into the hallway. Miles was waiting for me. He held out his hand. "It is over," he said. "Is it?" I asked. "The house is safe," he said. "The trust is locked. They can't touch you, Piper. Not ever again." I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway was cool. It didn't smell like floor wax anymore. It smelled like freedom. 2 hours later, I was back at Harbor Hollow. The afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long, golden beams across the water. I parked my sedan, the one they couldn't take, in the driveway. There was no yellow truck. There was no black SUV. There was only the sound of the wind moving through the cedar trees. I walked up the porch steps. I didn't need to check the camera. I didn't need to look over my shoulder. I unlocked the door. Not with the biometric scanner, but with the old brass key. I wanted to feel the mechanism turn. Click. I walked inside. The house welcomed me. The floorboards creaked in greeting. The smell of old wood and lemon oil wrapped around me like a blanket. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I made a cup of tea in Walter's chipped blue mug. I walked out to the back deck and sat in the rocking chair. The wind chimes began to sing. They were deep, resonant tones. Bong, bong, bong. I thought about Tessa, answering questions in a police station. I thought about Grant, calling his creditors to explain why the asset was gone. I thought about Elaine, alone in a penthouse she was about to lose. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and fleeting. I grieved for them, not for the people they were today, but for the people I had desperately wanted them to be. I grieved for the fantasy of a family that would love me without conditions. But as the wind chimes sang again, the grief faded, replaced by a profound peace. I looked out at the water. I was 28 years old. I was alone. I had enemies. But I was home. I raised the blue mug to the horizon, to the invisible point where the sky met the lake. "Grandpa," I whispered, the steam from the tea rising into the cool air. "Grandma." I took a sip. It tasted like victory. It tasted like the future. "I kept it," I said softly. "The door is closed. You can rest now." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe relaxing at home? Please drop a comment below and let me know your location and your thoughts on Piper's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to us.